My name's Dan Snow and I want to tell you about History Hit TV. It's like the Netflix for history. Hundreds of exclusive documentaries and interviews with the world's best historians. We've got an exclusive offer available to fans of Timeline. If you go to History Hit TV, you can either follow the information below this video or just Google History Hit TV and use the code TIMELINE. You get a special introductory offer. Go and check it out. In the meantime, enjoy this video.
Barbie was rightly called the Butcher of Lyon.
Somebody who had committed awful crimes in France.
He's a murderer!
Klaus Barbie became the leader of a gang of torturers and killers.
He thought he was untouchable.
The Klarsfelds are the most successful Nazi hunters of all.
I know that I endanger my life.
I was nervous very, very much.
You have to pay one day for the crimes you committed.
September 1971. German radical Beate Klarsfeld
Klaus Barbie's a murderer!
leads a protest on the steps of a Munich court.
We were very angry.
He's a murderer!
We had to do something.
She is outraged by the court's decision to drop the case against Nazi war criminal Klaus Barbie.
If he would die unpunished, it would be a defeat of justice.
Barbie fled Europe after the war. But Beate and her husband Serge Klarsfeld are prepared to hunt him down to the ends of the earth.
We decided one day to do something for justice. Not for vengeance, but for justice.
Claus Barbie, the former Gestapo chief in Lyon, has the blood of thousands of French Jews on his hands.
It was known that he was no more in Germany, that he was somewhere else in South America. The prosecutor in Munich, he said, you know, there's no way to pursue Barbie. We have not the proof. We hope that with the demonstration, the prosecutor would change his mind.
Beate encourages relatives of Barbie's victims to join the protest.
Madame Benguigui, who was mother of 3 boys who were arrested by Klaus Barbie. And she started a hunger strike. And Beate remained close to her and explained to the people what happened exactly.
There was an orphanage full of Jewish children in a little village called Isieux, not too far from Lyon. And one day in 1944, Barbie arranges for the entire orphanage to be cleared out. These are just very, very young children. They are sent to the transit camp at Drancy. And from there, they're dispatched to Auschwitz.
Madame Benguigui never saw her boys again.
Qu'est-ce qu'ils ont fait, ces enfants, pour les déporter et les envoyer au four?
Barbie, on April 7, 1944, signed a telex telling that the children orphanage was liquidated by the Gestapo and that 44 children were arrested and deported.
The case against Barbie has been dropped for lack of evidence. The prosecutor can't prove that Barbie knew he was sending the children to their deaths. But Beate claims to have incriminating new evidence.
And the German television arrived also, and when the general prosecutor saw that, he decided to have Beate and Madame Benguigui to come in his office.
And he said, Mrs. Klarsfeld, what do you want? I said, I had papers to prove the crimes Klaus Barbie committed.
She presents a report on a witness in Lyon who once heard Barbie say deported Jews would be killed.
So the general prosecutor told to Beate, find the direct witness who heard that, and I will reopen the case.
When Beate asks for the prosecutor's promise in writing, he says no. His secretary has gone home.
I said, I will write your promise. He had a typewriter in his office, and I said, please tell me what I have to write, and I wrote it, and then he signed, and with this letter, I could go back to France.
Beate and her husband Serge have dedicated their lives to hunting down Nazi criminals.
They're an extraordinary couple. Serge is French, and his father had been taken away by the Gestapo for being Jewish and had died in the camps.
I decided that I did not survive for nothing.
Beate was German, she was a German student, and she met Serge literally on the metro.
In France, in Paris.
We met then 2 or 3 days later, and then he told me that he's Jewish and that his father has been deported and gassed in Auschwitz.
And Beate's father, during the war, had fought with the German army. And it took Serge to open her eyes and make her aware of quite how vile and repellent the Nazi regime had been.
When I heard the story of my husband, for me it was sure that I have to do something as a German. We were a young couple, married, not a lot of money. Arno was born, my son, Serge and I said, we cannot say nothing. So we decided to act.
After a few months, I found the witness who was an attorney.
The lawyer tells Serge he met Claus Barbie at Gestapo headquarters in Lyon. A group of Jewish prisoners were awaiting execution.
And that he intervened and he told to Klaus Barbie, please, I ask you not to kill them, deport them. Barbie replied, deported or shot, it's the same thing. So that was a subjective proof.
So with this argument in hand, I went back to Munich and the prosecutor reopened the case.
What Beate does is she reminds the authorities that the victims and the victims' families are still there. This is a current thing. It's only 25, 26 years on.
The prosecutor has been won over by the Klarsfeld's arguments. He hands Beate a recent photo of a group of businessmen in Bolivia. One man looks suspiciously like the Butcher of Lyon.
Prosecutor said, I give you this photo, you go back to France and you ask survivors to compare, to see this photo and to ask them if they think it's Klaus Barbie. It's opportunity for me to assume my responsibilities and to fight as a German in order to bring the butcher of their children to justice.
The Klarsfeld's hunt for Klaus Barbie has begun.
Beate brought the photo to the French police and asked, is it the same man as Klaus Barbie in 1943?
This was a very important moment.
Two photos, they analyzed, and they told non-officially that it is the same man.
Always in our work we had been motivated, sure, but it was with more sorrow and more, I would say, emotion if you think about the killing of the children,
The Klarsfelds learn more of Barbie's dark past.
Klaus Barbie went to pretty religious school where he flourished and he thought that actually he might become a priest.
But at age 19, Barbie volunteered for the Nazi Party. he rose quickly through the ranks, from the Hitler Youth to the Gestapo. Holland, 1941. Now a lieutenant, Barbie helped round up the country's 140,000 Jews. He was rewarded with an Iron Cross before becoming head of the Gestapo in Lyon, France.
It was a crucial city, Lyon, at that time, a hotbed of a lot of French resistance activity. And the Gestapo, in order to counter this resistance, did so with the utmost brutality. And in Claus Barbie, they had the perfect man to do it.
Klaus Barbie is well known. He's the Butcher of Lyon. He was known for the crimes he committed in France during the war.
He was essentially a butcher, and he did just see people as flesh that he could beat around, cut, abuse, inject, do what he liked with.
Beate's next move is to go public with the Barbie photos.
Beate made such a noise in Germany that the photo of Klaus Barbie appeared in all the German newspapers.
But the reaction they're hoping for doesn't come from Germany. It comes from halfway around the world. A phone call from Lima, Peru.
And a man living in Lima told us that he suspected this businessman whose name was Klaus Altmann to be, in fact, Klaus Barbie.
He got a picture of Klaus Altmann, and he sent this photo and saying, you know, this Altmann, certainly Barbie, is living here in Lima.
And these photos were analyzed, and he was the same man. So we were sure that Barbie and Altmann were the same.
There's no doubt for us, no doubt at all.
For Barbie, the road to Peru has been long and twisting. In 1944, with Allied forces closing in, he fled to Germany, desperate to evade capture by the French.
Barbie then just, gets rid of his uniform at the war's end, and he almost became a beggar, just sort of kind of tramping the roads with a load of other ne'er-do-wells.
He spent 2 years on the run. But then, with the emergence of the Cold War, Barbie's fortunes took a surprising turn.
After the war, he was hired by the Americans as an anti-communist agent.
They had known that he had this time in Lyon, which was brutal, but it was very much a case of kind of not wanting to know.
So he became an agent in the service of the American Secret Service, and he was working for the CIA afterwards.
At the beginning of the Cold War, the Americans, the British, the French needed men like Barbie to spy on the Soviets.
But by 1951, his value as a spy was in doubt.
His contacts are drying up. The Americans know that the information coming in is poor, yet at the same time, they don't want to hand him over to the French.
First thing Klaus Barbie is going to say, I've been working for the Americans. That would be deeply embarrassing.
So the Americans think, what are we going to do? We can't kill him. We can't give him to the French. We can't just let him lead a normal life. So we're going to have to help him escape.
They plugged into the escape network that was working for the rest of the Nazis, and they sent Barbie down that rat line.
They issue Barbie with a false name, false papers, and Barbie and his family managed to escape through to Genoa and then on a boat to Latin America.
Klaus Barbie probably looked at Bolivia because it was so off the beaten track. Not easy to get there then. And so I think Bolivia was seen as a place where, you could sort of disappear in the woodwork.
But even in Bolivia, the former Gestapo chief could not escape his past.
When he settled in La Paz in 1951, he would go to the German club, and he had difficulties with a few people. That's when they began to discover that he had tendencies towards National Socialism, and a few members didn't sympathize with him.
Now 1971, money-making schemes have brought him to Lima, Peru. The Klarsfeld's mission is to bring the Butcher of Lyon to trial in Europe.
It's not difficult to kill, but we don't want to kill. We want a trial.
It was important to bring him to justice because he had to pay for his crimes in front of an ordinary court.
She decides, right, I've got a young family, doesn't matter, I'm going to get on the plane. I'm not just going to sit in Paris and, issue press releases.
I'm going to Lima to ask on the spot the extradition of Claus Barbie.
What started out as a fight for justice in Europe has become a chase across continents.
So she flies to Lima, and she arrives in the dead of night.
So I'm alone, I have no bodyguards, no secretary.
But nevertheless, she's a woman of immense energy. She decides that she's going to give, countless statements to the press.
It's a protection for me. The newspapers announced my arrival.
Peruvian authorities take action, but not against Beate. Hoping to avoid an international incident, they force Barbie to leave the country immediately.
That's when the Peruvian National Police escorted him to the border.
Lo entrega a policías bolivianos.
He fled to Bolivia as he was a Bolivian citizen.
Because there was no treaty of extradition between Bolivia and France, he came back to Bolivia.
Now, at this stage, many of us would have given up and thought, well, the chase is over, but no, Beate gets on a plane.
So I said, my place to fight is now La Paz, Bolivia.
I think there was part of him that was daring. It was like, catch me if you can, and it was defiant.
My aim was to make public who is this man they're hiding. I had a file about his past, and I delivered to the newspapers and also to the Minister of Justice, the Chief of the Police, in order to tell them Klaus Altmann is Klaus Barbie. And you have to extradite him.
But in seeking to expose a mass murderer, she exposes herself to danger.
There was a dictator at that time in Bolivia, and the head of police very strong and very cruel. So Beate was arrested, released, arrested again.
I know that I endanger my life, but I'm not so much concentrated on this.
Beate is not detained long, but it is clear Barbie has friends in high places. Friends who've been watching his back since the first day he came to Bolivia in 1951.
He was protected by the Bolivians because when he entered the country, it was a dictatorship, and no doubt they had known about his activities in Germany and in France.
All the nasty things, horrendous things he did, served him well in Bolivia because he knew a lot about interrogation.
And he's using all his Gestapo experience to advise the dictatorships on how to deal with anybody who's against the regime.
So there were some really shady deals going on in the 60s and the 70s involving the military.
Barbie becomes an arms dealer, and he manages to do so by setting up his own little maritime business. It's called Transmaritima Boliviana. He uses it basically to launder money, sell arms.
He was accused of trafficking arms, but he was never proven.
At one point, he is given $10,000 to take some cargo by the Bolivian government, but he never bothers to do anything with the cargo and just pockets the money.
After 4 days in La Paz, Beate's campaign gained some traction.
members of the Jewish community, and many Bolivians were obviously very, very incensed about the fact that, Bolivia was the home to a former Nazi.
The national press began making all sorts of conjectures, and it did bother him. He had been discovered.
But the government still refuses to extradite him.
The Bolivian government considers that Barbie, under the name of Altman, was really a Bolivian citizen.
Beate decides to continue her fight on home turf. On her way to Paris, she has a stopover in Lima, where government authorities are waiting.
She's in this police office. She says, "Why am I here?" And they goes, "Well, we're worried about your safety."
The Peruvian police inform Beate she's received death threats.
Having made such trouble and identifying Klaus Barbie, and he had friends in Lima.
Was a friend of Barbie, was an active pro-Nazi.
They threatened and saying, we will take vengeance on Mrs. Klarsfeld.
I was nervous very, very much.
She says, "Well, just give me a gun. I'm perfectly happy to go around, looking after myself."
I'm more afraid about not to fulfill my work than physical fear, Police protected me until my return to France.
She comes back home to the Paris apartment and finds that Serge has left it in a mess with the children. So as soon as she gets back, she goes straight back into the domestic role of washing their clothes, cleaning and cooking. So it's extraordinary to think this sort of middle-class Parisian housewife is also conducting this great fight for justice.
That fight will soon gain an unexpected ally. Claus Barbie's past is about to catch up with him. Just 1 week after her media blitz, Beate's bold tactic appears to pay off. Bolivian authorities are pressured into taking action against Barbie.
He was arrested by the Bolivian security.
The excuse? Government officials claim Barbie has an unpaid debt of $4,000. Now desperate to raise cash, Barbie takes a huge gamble. He grants an interview to French TV for $2,000.
He speaks in German. I am not Klaus Barbie.
Ich bin nicht Barbie, wie ich schon gesagt habe. Ich bin Klaus Altman.
I have never tortured, and I don't know about Klaus Barbie. I hadn't been in Lyon. And at one moment he asked him a question in French.
Je ne sais pas. Vous avez la conscience tranquille.
He replied, so was one element more to know that he is Klaus Barbie and he knows French and he had been in Lyon.
Barbie was utterly brutal. He would half drown the victims from freezing baths. At one point, he injected some acid into somebody's lungs. One of his favorite little techniques was to shoot people in such a way at the top of a flight of stairs that when he shot them in the back of their head, their dead body would do a perfect somersault. And he would pride himself on getting it just right. I mean, it was his craft, if you like.
One day after the Barbie interview airs, Serge Klarsfeld joins a noisy protest in front of the Bolivian embassy in Paris.
We had to fight with a great energy to the extreme end of their strength.
2 days later, the French president calls for Barbie's extradition.
The Bolivian government told that the reply will be given by the Supreme Court.
Determined to influence the court's decision, Beate starts planning a return trip to Bolivia.
We had to fight with a South American dictatorship.
Meanwhile, in La Paz, Barbie uses his interview fee to pay back part of his government debt, enough to buy his freedom. Two weeks later, Beate arrives, armed with a new strategy.
Beate went back to Bolivia with the mother of 3 children who were arrested in Lisieux.
The only surviving brother of those children is Alexandra Hallenbrenner.
My mother didn't hesitate for a second. She said, "For the love of the children, I will go."
We had a poster saying, Bolivian population, I'm the mother of the children deported by Klaus Barbie. We ask you to send Klaus Barbie back to justice to France.
The government said to Beate, "If you speak to the press, we'll put you in prison."
Doing that in a military dictatorship takes a lot of guts, and especially in the 70s. You don't want to end up in a prison at that point in that country, but she did.
Bolivian authorities are desperate to shut her up, but realizing her arrest could lead to more media attention, they decide to let her go.
In the 3 weeks they were there, every day they were on the front page. On every newspaper, they were talking about Beate Klarsfeld and Mrs. Hallenbrenner.
On their last day in Bolivia, Beate makes her strongest stand yet.
They chained themselves to a bench until nighttime.
We have always to take spectacular actions because if not, the newspapers wouldn't speak about it. We gave them what they wanted.
The police came several times and ripped up the posters, and each time the Bolivians remade them.
These 2 very brave women chaining themselves to a bench. I mean, it was a very, very brave protest.
Beate enjoys a warm welcome home, but whether Klaus Barbie is any closer to justice is still in doubt.
Il n'y a pas de justice en Bolivie. Le gouvernement tient avec lui. Peut-être le peuple le comprend. Pas le gouvernement. Non.
Months pass. Barbie remains free. The Bolivian Supreme Court still hasn't ruled on France's extradition request. Frustrated by the delay, the Klarsfelds hatch a daring and dangerous new plan. They are going to kidnap Klaus Barbie and smuggle him to France. Serge travels to Santiago, Chile.
We wanted justice.
He meets with a former revolutionary who once fought alongside Che Guevara.
Regis Debray decided to help us in kidnapping Klaus Barbie, first from Bolivia by car, crossing the border to go to Chile.
Debray tells Serge he knows just the right people for the job.
We arrived at the border of Chile and Bolivia, and we met Gustavo Sanchez Salazar, who is his friend from the army. He told us that an attempt of kidnapping is possible between La Paz and Cochabamba, because Barbie had a business in Cochabamba.
We had to pay the money to buy a car, and the car was needed in order to capture Klaus Barbie.
I gave the money, $5,000.
After weeks of planning, the kidnap plot is finally underway.
Our friend who took the money and bought the car had an accident with the car.
And so we had to abandon this plan.
It was impossible to make the attempt.
It is a stunning blow for the Klarsfelds. Barbie may never be tried for his crimes. Despite the setbacks, Serge and Beate never waver. Through the 70s, they remain determined to bring Klaus Barbie to trial.
It's very, very hard during 10 years to have the same strength and the same will.
Their life since then has just been one long, very, very hardly fought campaign against injustice.
It's a great responsibility when you start a fight, which is a fight known by the media, the public opinion, and so on.
August 1981. Klaus Barbie has new hunters on his trail. New York Times photographer Marissa Bell Schumacher and freelance reporter Peter McFerrin.
I began investigating the links between the Nazis, the paramilitary, the military, and cocaine traffickers.
Barbie is now living in Cochabamba, a city 400 kilometers southeast of La Paz. In recent years, he's made himself a key figure in the Bolivian underworld, aiding the cocaine barons who now control the government.
Klaus Barbie became the leader of a gang of torturers and killers working for the military dictatorship.
And they're called the fiancés of death. Barbie issues them with orders to go and do what they like and basically murder and pillage.
Capturing political opponents, torturing them and murdering them for a group of right-wing generals in Bolivia.
These were criminals. And Barbie worked with these criminals and opened doors for them.
He's like a pig in clover. He's made an honorary colonel, and he starts becoming in charge of suppressing resistance movements in Bolivia.
And it's even rumored that Klaus Barbie played a role in the capture and assassination of Che Guevara.
Marissa Schumacher and I decided to go to Cochabamba to track down Klaus Barbie. I had a friend in Cochabamba who was a journalist who also worked at the local phone company. And he was able to identify the area that he was living in.
Peter
McFerrin began ringing the doorbell so he would come out, but he didn't feel like coming out.
We probably were standing in front of Klaus Barbie or Klaus Altmann's home for about half an hour. You know, we're knocking on the door, you know, hoping for him to come out.
Police are from New York Times.
He saw them through the window and realized they were journalists.
After a while, Klaus Barbie came to the window. And we told him we'd like to interview him. And it was a matter of seconds later that a couple vans pulled out and people came out with machine guns.
The military police arrived, detained them, and confiscated their photos.
It was a complete surprise, a shock for us. We were obviously terrified, especially because Marissa Schumacher was expecting. And they took us to the military headquarters. But it just happened so fast. Before we realized that we were in the military barracks. They basically threatened to torture us, and they were obviously very threatening in their tone. And their big concern was, how were we able to track down Barbie? Who was our source? How did we find him? The worst part was the threatening to take our fingernails out. And then I think they soon realized that they made a big mistake arresting two people who were working on this story for the New York Times. So after a few hours, we were let go. We got out on the first flight we could. And we went back to La Paz, and 2 or 3 days later, the New York Times published a front-page story about the Nazis, about the paramilitary, about the cocaine traffickers. And hours later, I received a series of death threats. I was advised by friends and family, you better get out of Bolivia very quickly. And I caught the next flight out to Puerto Rico.
Barbie didn't disappear from Bolivia because he did not believe that he will be arrested.
He thought he was untouchable. And he also made sure that he had relationships that allowed him to stay in Bolivia.
The fall of 1981 brings political upheaval to Bolivia. A pro-democracy movement forces out the country's authoritarian regime.
The president who took over was left of center, Hernán Siles Suazo. And it was clear that he was not going to allow Barbie to continue in Bolivia.
When times get liberal, things aren't so good for someone like Klaus Barbie. The Klarsfelds realised that it might be possible to try and get either the French or the West Germans to extradite Barbie.
The fact that democracy returned to Bolivia was the beginning of his end.
Bolivia is no longer a safe haven for Klaus Barbie. Seizing the moment, Serge turns to the most powerful man in France, President François Mitterrand.
We convinced Mitterrand to support an operation to arrest Barbie and to send him back to France.
But to pull it off, they need help from the new democratic Bolivian government.
The Bolivians realise actually they've got something they can pick Barbie up on. He owes them $10,000 for not shipping these supplies that he was meant to have shipped. And he says, well, I'll pay you. And they go, well, pay us now. And he says, well, I don't have the money on me. He says, right, you're under arrest.
Klaus didn't have that kind of money. He had about $5,000.
So he gets sent to prison, and he can't quite believe this has happened. $10,000, not a lot of money, but will be very expensive for Barbie.
I spoke to the lawyer to find some way to solve that problem, but I couldn't. Finally, I had to ask for a loan.
Eventually the money's paid. The Bolivians then say, well, you've paid the money, but you owe us the interest. And he goes, well, we can't get the interest, it's the weekend. Well, too bad, if you can't get us the money, you're going to have to be kicked out of this country. Barbie knows that they're out to get him.
Now, Serge finds that the new Bolivian regime has some familiar faces.
Our friend Salazar, who had been in exile in Chile, came back in this new government.
Gustavo Sanchez Salazar, head of the Ministry of Security, canceled his Bolivian naturalization because he lied when he arrived on his Nazi past. Like that, he could be expelled from Bolivia.
And he thinks it's not a problem, because in some way, like Barbie always does, he'll wriggle out of it, or if he's brought to trial, he'll be able to convince the jury that he's innocent.
But Klaus Barbie's long exile in South America is at an end. Officers escort a decoy from the jail, while Barbie is quietly taken out a side entrance. He thinks he's going to Germany, where he assumes he'll get a sympathetic hearing.
He's taken to the airport. There's a Bolivian justice minister says to him, what do you think of, all the evil you've done? And Barbie's very non-committal. So he gets on this plane.
Pero sin embargo usted sabe que los pueblos de Europa y particularmente Francia no han olvidado.
Yo olvidé. Si ellos no han olvidado es otro asunto.
The plane lands, destination unknown for Barbie as yet. And the only voices he heard, they aren't German voices, they're French voices. And it's at that point he realises that the game is up for him. He is in the land of his enemy now. It's not actually France, it's French Guyana, but it's French territory.
On the airport tarmac in Cayenne, Guyana, Klaus Barbie is officially charged with crimes against humanity.
No me puede dar un juicio, no se condena, no condena, eso no me corresponde.
The final leg of the journey takes Barbie to Lyon, France, scene of his atrocities 40 years before.
We were at home. They called us to tell that he's in the plane.
Tonight, Klaus Barbie was brought back to the French city where he earned the name the Butcher of Lyon. Under heavy guard, Barbie entered Montluc prison, the same prison where 40 years ago, the ex-Gestapo chief is said to have tortured and killed.
On television, we saw the arrival when Klaus Barbie entered the place where he had committed the crimes.
When he was deported to Lyon in 1983, My mother was happy beyond belief.
A police motorcade takes the ex-Gestapo officer to the court.
The Barbie trial is one of the key moments in French 20th century history.
Klaus Barbie faces multiple counts of crimes against humanity. Among the team of prosecutors is Serge Klarsfeld.
We believe that we will be convicted because he was guilty.
Barbie once told me they are always going to want to do something, but I'm in the hands of destiny, nothing more.
His attitude did not change. There was absolutely no remorse for what he'd done.
And never a sign of regret, never a word of regret, and no word of the victims, you know.
On July 4th, 1987, 16 years after the Klarsfelds began their hunt, Barbie is found guilty.
The former Gestapo chief showed no emotion as a sentence of life imprisonment was passed.
I was satisfied, but I wasn't filled with hatred or vengeance. It was an historic judgment, and that was the goal. For my mother, too.
Until then, never you saw somebody, a group of Jews bringing to justice Nazi criminals by trial.
I see them as evil hunters, and they were determined to track somebody down who had committed so much evil. And that's admirable.
It was important to see that this abject and awful and brutal Claus Barbie in front of his judges was brought to justice. You have to pay one day for the crime you committed.